Why did my son lie about who I am? The moment I realized something had shifted was when my son, Ethan, looked at me like I was a stranger. We were sitting across the dinner table, the usual clatter of cutlery replaced by a tense silence. He barely touched his food, kept his head down, and when I asked how school was, he just shrugged. That wasn't like him. Ethan had always been an open-hearted child, the kind who once told me everything, from playground squabbles to the color of his dreams. At first, I chalked it up to adolescence. 16 was a difficult age, I told myself. Hormones, friend pressure, identity. Maybe he was pulling away like teenagers do, testing boundaries. But there was something different in his silence. A certain chill that didn't come from rebellion, but from rejection. He started spending more time in his room, headphones on, eyes dull when we talked. If I asked him to join me in the kitchen or help in the garden, he made an excuse or didn't answer at all. His father, Mark, brushed it off. Boys his age need space, he said casually, flipping through the newspaper. But Mark's voice had a tightness to it, a forced ease. And I saw him glance too quickly at Ethan when he thought I wasn't looking. Then came the evening Ethan refused to go on our annual mother-son hike, a tradition since he was 7. He looked up at me, his expression carefully blank, and said, "I don't feel like pretending anymore." That sentence rang in my ears like a bell tolling. Pretending? Pretending what? I tried to talk to him after that, gently at first, then with more urgency. But every conversation turned brittle. He accused me of being too nosy, too emotional, too controlling. None of it made sense. It felt like Ethan was angry at someone else, but he was looking right at me. One night I stood in the hallway outside his door, listening to him on a phone call with someone. His voice was low, hurt, and I only caught snippets. She doesn't get it, never tells me the truth. And then, I wish she was still around. My heart pounded. Who was he talking about? From that moment I couldn't sleep. I started second-guessing everything, every moment, every hug, every word I'd spoken to him. Was he angry at me, or was he grieving something I didn't understand? I turned to Mark again, asking if he'd noticed anything different. He nodded vaguely and said, "He'll grow out of it?" But his eyes flicked toward the fireplace mantel, where a family photo stood, one that now seemed like a cruel lie. Days turned into weeks, and I began to dread coming home. The house felt foreign. Ethan's once loud laughter had vanished, replaced by doors quietly closing. I was losing him, and I didn't know why. One Saturday, I stood in front of his bedroom door for 10 full minutes before knocking. He didn't answer, but I opened it anyway. The room was clean, unnaturally so. No posters, no photos of us. The shelf where our family pictures used to sit was empty. The only thing left was a small wooden box on the desk. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I sat on his bed and looked around, trying to find traces of the boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, who once told me I was the safest place in the world. That boy was gone. As I left his room, I noticed something else. On the back of the door was a small sticker. It was one I remembered giving him years ago. A rainbow with the words, "Forever Family," written beneath it. It had been partially scratched off. Something inside me shifted that night. The grief wasn't just about distance. It was about being replaced. About something I couldn't name yet, but could feel creeping into the cracks of our life. And when I looked into Ethan's eyes the next morning, I realized what scared me the most. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked like someone who had made up his mind. The first real clue came at a place I least expected, a routine parent-teacher conference. I had barely slept the night before, nervous not because of grades, but because I hadn't had a real conversation with Ethan in weeks. His silence had become a heavy wall between us, and I hoped this meeting might offer some glimpse behind it. His English teacher, Mrs. Lathrop, was a kind-faced woman in her 50s, with a careful way of speaking. She gestured for me to sit and pulled out a folder thick with assignments and notes. She praised Ethan's writing, called him insightful and mature. "He's going through something, though," she added softly. "I can see it in his essays. There's a theme of longing, of missing someone." I nodded slowly, unsure how much to share, but then she said something that made my stomach turn to ice. "He mentioned his mother left when he was a baby. That must be hard for him, even if he doesn't remember her." I blinked. I'm his mother?" I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I've been there since the day he was born." Mrs. Lathrop's eyes widened and a flush of color rose in her cheeks. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Maybe I misunderstood. He referred to someone else in his writing, a woman named Dana." I assumed. I didn't hear the rest. My hands went cold in my lap, and a quiet roar filled my ears. Dana. The name meant nothing to me, but it meant something to Ethan. Enough for him to speak about her in school, enough for him to frame his identity around a woman who, if I believed his teacher, wasn't me. I nodded and smiled my way through the rest of the meeting, my mind spinning. When I got home, I didn't confront Ethan. Not yet. Instead, I went into the garage, shut the door, and sat in the car with the engine off. I stared at the dashboard and tried to slow my breathing. Had someone told him a lie, or had I been living one? I began to question everything. Every bedtime story, every whispered comfort, every scraped knee and packed lunch. Had it all meant less to him than this phantom, this Dana? The next day, I opened Ethan's baby book. I flipped through pages of memories, his tiny hospital bracelet, his first drawings, his birthday cards. And yet, there were gaps. Whole sections that once overflowed with pictures now had pages missing. I asked Mark about it that evening, pointing out the odd holes in the album. He looked up from his laptop and said, maybe they fell out. But his answer was too quick, too rehearsed. I pressed him. Did Ethan ever ask about his birth mother? Mark hesitated, eyes flickering. Not that I know of. There was something brittle in his voice, something cracking. I stayed up late that night, scrolling through Ethan's old social media posts, rereading captions. Most were typical teenage things, but then I found a post from 2 years ago, a vague one, barely noticed at the time. It was a photo of a field captioned, "Somewhere she's watching." It had one comment, from someone named Dana W., just a single heart emoji. The truth had begun to slither out of its hiding place, and it terrified me. The next morning, I made Mark coffee and sat across from him at the kitchen table. I asked again, more firmly this time, "Who is Dana?" He didn't answer. He just looked down at the mug, and I knew in that moment, there was a truth in our family that I was never meant to find. The attic had always been my sanctuary. It held the old comforts of our past, photo albums, baby clothes, little keepsakes from holidays long gone. On a quiet Sunday, with Mark conveniently out on errands and Ethan locked away in his room, I climbed up there looking for answers. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe more baby pictures, maybe an explanation. Some thread I could pull that would make this unravel in a way that made sense. But what I found instead chilled me to my core. The album was tucked in a dusty plastic bin marked "Family." I remembered putting it together when Ethan was 5, a scrapbook filled with pictures from birthdays, first days of school, vacations, the quiet joy of ordinary days. I flipped it open and saw our smiling faces, mine, Mark's, and a chubby-cheeked Ethan, full of life. But then something strange, entire sections of the album had been altered. Whole pages were missing. Photo corners were empty. A few pictures were still there, but they had been cut, literally snipped, to crop me out of the frame. In one, my arm was visible, resting on Ethan's shoulder, but my face was gone. In another, Ethan was laughing in a park, but the right side of the photo was torn. I stared at the mutilated pages, feeling the burn of betrayal. Who had done this? Why? I wasn't just removed. I was erased. Underneath the album was a stack of loose photos. Some were recent, some older. One in particular caught my attention. Ethan, no older than 6, sitting beside a woman I didn't recognize. She had auburn hair, soft eyes, and a smile that reached through the years. Ethan was holding her hand. They looked familiar. Comfortable. I turned the photo over. In Mark's handwriting, faint but unmistakable, Dana and E. Fall picnic. My throat closed. I stared at the name until the letters blurred. Dana, the woman from the teacher's slip. The woman Ethan had been writing about, and now her face, preserved here, hidden in our attic like a secret that had refused to stay buried. I heard the garage door open downstairs. Mark was back. I put everything back where I found it, carefully, quietly, then shut the attic door and went to the kitchen. I couldn't confront him yet. I needed more. Needed to understand. That night, I sat on the edge of Ethan's bed while he pretended to sleep. The room was quiet, save for his slow, steady breathing. On the nightstand, his phone buzzed once. A notification popped up, and for just a second, I saw the name Dana W. He rolled over to hide the screen, pretending to be asleep. But I knew he was awake. I left the room without a word. The next day, I told Mark I needed the truth. As Ethan adopted, I asked, my voice shaking, "Is Dana his birth mother?" Mark froze, halfway through tying his shoes. "Why would you ask that?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He stood slowly, avoiding my eyes. "We agreed we wouldn't talk about it," he said. "We agreed, when we brought him home, that we'd raise him as our own." My chest went hollow. "So it's true." Mark sat back down, his hands trembling. Dana was young. 17. She couldn't keep him. She wanted him to have a stable life. We were the only ones who stepped forward. "And you never told him?" I whispered. "We were going to," he said. "But every year that passed, it got harder. And you were so happy. I didn't want to ruin that." I felt like I was falling, like the foundation of my entire world had been quietly replaced without my knowledge. Everything I had built, every moment with Ethan, suddenly felt conditional, temporary, not because I didn't love him, but because I wasn't allowed to know him fully. And now, someone else, someone he had found on his own, was filling the cracks we'd tried to seal with silence. I didn't cry. Not yet. There was too much left unanswered. Later that evening, I went back to the attic and stared at the photo again. Dana's eyes looked back at me with a softness I didn't understand. Was it guilt? Love? Something in between. I didn't hate her, But I hated that she had lived in the shadows of my life for so long, close enough to touch, too far to question. And somehow Ethan had found her, which meant he'd known the truth long before I did. Mark wasn't usually one to avoid eye contact. He had this steady way of looking people in the eye, whether during arguments or over simple dinner conversations. That's how I knew something was deeply wrong. He wouldn't meet my gaze anymore. It started subtly. When I walked into the room, he suddenly found a reason to busy himself. If I asked a question, he'd answer it while looking at the floor or some distant object, like a man watching smoke rise from a fire he refused to admit he started. I tried to ignore it at first. Maybe it was stress. Work had been hard on him lately, and he always carried pressure quietly, folded under layers of practicality. But one night, while we sat in the living room in front of the flickering television, I asked directly, "Did you ever keep in touch with her?" He didn't even need clarification. We both knew I meant Dana. Mark flinched. Just a slight movement, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He hesitated, then gave a small nod. Just once, about 5 years ago. She reached out. The air between us grew still. What did she want? To know how Ethan was doing, he said, his voice low. Nothing more. She didn't push. She just asked. And you didn't tell me. Mark sighed. What was I supposed to say? That the woman who gave birth to our son still thinks about him? That she still sends messages through the void and hopes he's okay? His voice cracked there just slightly. I hadn't heard that sound in years. You should have told me, I said. I know, he whispered. But that wasn't the end of it. The real blow came when I discovered the second phone. I was looking for a screwdriver in the garage tool chest when I saw it, tucked between an old extension cord and a frayed pair of gloves. It was an older model, dusty and worn, but still working. I turned it on, my hands shaking. There were only a few contacts, but the name, Dana, stood out like a scream. I opened the text thread. There weren't hundreds of messages, just enough to know it wasn't nothing. Conversations spaced out over months, then years. Always cautious, always affectionate. She deserves to know who she is to him. Dana had written in one. He's too young. He needs time, Mark replied. Time's running out. He's looking for answers. The last message was dated 8 months ago. If he reaches out, I won't turn him away. I sat there on the cold garage floor for a long time, the phone resting in my lap like a confession. Mark hadn't just withheld the truth. He had created a secret world with Dana, one where they made decisions about Ethan without me. When I confronted him that night, he didn't deny it. She's not trying to take him from us, he said. She just wants to be part of his life. She never stopped loving him. And what about me? I asked, trembling. What does that make me? He didn't answer. Because there was no answer that would make it okay. I thought about all the times I had sat up with Ethan through fevers, wiped tears from his cheeks after nightmares, helped him with school projects, listened to his dreams. None of that was pretend. None of it was less real than biology. And yet, here I was, outside the circle. Over the next few days, I watched Mark carefully. Every time his phone buzzed, I wondered if it was her. Every time he glanced at Ethan with quiet guilt, I wondered what part of the story he was holding back. Ethan was still withdrawn, but more than ever, I sensed that he knew something I didn't. That perhaps Mark had told him pieces of the truth in whispers and shadows, or maybe Ethan had discovered the messages on his own. Either way, the damage was done. We were a family stitched together by secrets, and now the seams were coming apart. Ethan's 16th birthday was supposed to be a celebration. I'd spent days preparing, ordered his favorite cake, wrapped presents with silver ribbon, even dug out the old video camera we used to record his birthdays with when he was little. I wanted it to feel special, meaningful, like a reminder that no matter what was going on, he was still deeply loved. But something in him had already shifted beyond my reach. That morning, he barely said a word. He sat at the breakfast table, stared at the cereal, then pushed the bowl away without touching it. I tried to coax him with a smile, a gentle touch on his shoulder, but he flinched at the contact. Happy birthday? I whispered. He nodded but didn't meet my eyes. We had invited a few of his friends over for dinner. He stayed in his room most of the day, only coming down when the doorbell rang. Even then, he barely spoke to anyone. I watched him from across the room, standing near the snack table, eyes glazed over as his friends chatted. He didn't laugh, didn't smile, not even when they sang. After the cake, after the guests had left and the house had gone quiet, he disappeared upstairs. I gave him some time, then followed. I knocked. No answer. I opened the door slowly. He was sitting on the floor, his back against the bed, phone in hand. I stepped inside. Can we talk? I asked. He didn't look at me. There's nothing to talk about? I knelt beside him. You're not okay? I can feel it? Please, Ethan, just tell me what's going on. He exhaled, and for a moment, I thought he might finally let me in. But then he said it. You're not my real mom. The words were ice in my chest. I stared at him, unable to breathe. I mean, you are? he added quickly, but the damage was already done. But not really. Not the one who gave birth to me, not the one who had to give me up. I know about Dana. My heart beat so hard it echoed in my ears. How do you know? I asked softly. He finally looked at me. I found letters in Dad's drawer from her, and I've talked to her. My mind reeled. When, over the past year, he said, we started messaging. Then we talked on the phone. She told me everything. I sat back, stunned. And you didn't think I deserved to know? He looked down. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't want to hurt you. That's what hurts the most. I whispered, that you couldn't talk to me. He shrugged, like it was too late for explanations. She's part of me. I needed to know who she was. I felt something inside me splinter. Did you ever think about what I've done for you all these years? About the nights I stayed up when you were sick, the times I held you after nightmares, all of that? Disappear? No, he said quickly. It didn't, but I needed more. I needed answers. And what did she tell you? That she didn't want to give me up. That it wasn't her choice. I felt my throat close. That's not true. He shrugged again, tired of choosing between two versions of the past. Maybe it doesn't matter, he said. Maybe I just needed her? The room was quiet for a long time. He wouldn't look at me again. And I couldn't stop looking at him. The boy I'd raised, the boy who was now in this moment. Eventually, he stood. I need to be alone. I left his room slowly, each step heavier than the last. Downstairs, I stood in the living room where the birthday decorations still hung limp and meaningless. Balloons drifting slightly, cake untouched on the counter. My hands trembled as I picked up the video camera. I had planned to record him blowing out candles, laughing with his friends. I hadn't pressed record. That night, Mark found me sitting in the dark, holding that camera. I didn't look at him when I spoke. He said I'm not his real mom. Mark exhaled. He's confused? No, he's not, I said. He's just finally saying what he's been feeling for a long time. There was nothing left to say. No comfort that would make that truth less sharp. I went to bed alone that night, and for the first time since Ethan came into my life, I couldn't remember what it felt like to be needed by him. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman's name. Dana. It circled in my thoughts like a fly trapped behind glass, small, constant, maddening. The truth of her existence now hovered over everything. And yet I still didn't know who she was. Not really. Not beyond a few pictures and stolen conversations. But then one day I found something I was never meant to see. Ethan had gone to school. I was changing his bedsheets, trying to do something, anything, that made me feel like a mother again, like I still had some place in his life. As I lifted the mattress to tuck in the corner, a soft thump caught my attention. Something slid down from the frame and landed on the floor with a muffled sound. It was a journal. Worn leather, elastic band, slightly frayed edges. I stared at it for a long time, my heart warring with my conscience. I had no right to read it. But then again, hadn't I already lost every right that mattered? I opened it. The first few pages were filled with scattered thoughts. School stress, memories, lyrics from songs. But then I reached the part that changed everything. I wish I knew what she looked like. I've stared at her photos for hours. Her eyes are like mine. Another entry. I asked Dad about Dana. He told me not to bring it up, said it would complicate things. How could knowing where I come from be wrong? And then, sometimes I think Mom knows something's off. She looks at me like she's afraid of losing me. Maybe she should be. I stopped reading, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. The entries stretched over a year, his secret journey unfolding between the lines. Messages to Dana, moments he spent imagining her voice, his joy the first time they spoke. His confusion, his guilt. She said she never stopped thinking about me, that she lit a candle for me every year on my birthday. That when she gave me up, a piece of her stayed broken. And then, a line that nearly shattered me. I love the woman who raised me, but I don't feel like I belong here anymore. The words blurred as I stared at them, my hands trembling. I set the journal down slowly and backed away, as though I had stumbled into a sacred space and broken something just by breathing. For hours, I couldn't move. Couldn't stop replaying the entries in my head. His longing for Dana wasn't a betrayal. It was a part of him that had been left unanswered for too long. A void I couldn't fill, no matter how much love I poured in. Later that evening, I sat outside in the backyard. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the grass. I remembered Ethan as a toddler running barefoot through this very yard, chasing butterflies and screaming with laughter. I had held his scraped knees in my hands, kissed away tears. And yet none of that had been enough to keep this from happening. When Mark came home, I told him I'd found the journal. He looked tired. He always looked tired now. He's hurting, he said softly. I should have told him sooner. You should have told me, I replied. I thought I was protecting you, protecting us. I looked at him, not angry, just exhausted. You weren't protecting anything. You were hiding behind time and hoping it wouldn't catch up. He didn't deny it. That night, I left the journal where Ethan would find it again. I didn't mention reading it. I just wanted him to know, somehow, that I saw his truth now, that I understood. The next morning, he didn't say anything. But as he walked past me, he paused for a breath. Not long, just a moment. Then he said, "You weren't supposed to see that." "I know," I replied gently. He looked at me then, eyes cloudy with guilt and something softer beneath. "But maybe it's good that you did." And then he left for school, leaving a silence that didn't sting as sharply as before. Because now, at least, we were no longer pretending. Mark's confession didn't come easily. It was as though he had been carrying a fragile vase inside him for years, tiptoeing around it, praying it wouldn't fall and shatter. But the vase had already cracked, and now all that remained was the truth spilling out in slow, uneven drops. We sat at the kitchen table that night, the room dimly lit by the pendant light overhead. It flickered slightly as if even the house felt the tension. "I didn't know how to tell you," Mark began, his voice flat. "I should have, years ago, but every time I tried, I imagined how you'd look at me after, and I couldn't do it." "Do what?" I asked, though I already knew. I needed him to say the words. "To tell you that Ethan wasn't yours by birth, that Dana, she was the one who carried him. Not you." I said nothing. I had always known I hadn't given birth to Ethan. But the way Mark said it, the way he wrapped Dana around those sentences, made it feel like I had been erased from Ethan's story with a single breath. "Why didn't you tell him?" I whispered. Mark leaned forward, elbows on the table, his hands covering his face. "Because when we brought him home, when you held him that first time, you were radiant. Like the world had handed you something it owed you. I couldn't ruin that. I couldn't risk losing that light." I blinked through hot tears. "So you lied. To both of us." He nodded slowly. "At first it was silence, not a lie. And then it was too late to go back." I stood, needing to move, to breathe. I paced the kitchen, every step weighted with years of misunderstanding. "She sent letters," I said, remembering the ones I'd found. "Did you ever write her back?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "I told her he was doing well, that he was happy. I didn't think she'd ever find a way to reach him directly. But she did." "Yes," he said, "because I wasn't brave enough to do the right thing. And now we're here." The silence between us was suffocating. I looked at him. This man I had trusted with my heart, my home, and my family. "You didn't just lie about Dana. You took away Ethan's right to know where he came from, and you took away my right to know the whole truth about the boy I've raised." Mark looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw him not as the confident man I married, but as someone small and lost. "He's gonna choose her," I said, my voice barely audible. Mark didn't respond, because we both knew it was already happening. Later that night, I went to Ethan's room. The door was slightly ajar. He was sitting at his desk, headphones off, his phone resting in his lap. He looked up, surprised to see me. "I know," I said gently. "Dad told me everything." He stared at me for a moment, unsure whether to retreat or speak. "I don't hate you," I continued. "And I don't hate her. But I hate that I had to find out like this." "I didn't mean to hurt you," he whispered. "I know," I said. "But you did, and now we have to figure out where to go from here." He nodded slowly, his face pale, young, older than it should have looked. "I'm sorry. I'm your mother," I said. "And nothing will ever change that. But I understand now that there's someone else in your heart too. And I can't compete with that. I shouldn't have to." He looked away. I stepped into the room, placed my hand on his shoulder. "If you want to meet her, talk to her, even spend time with her, I won't stop you." He nodded again, slowly, like the weight of the secret was finally too much to carry. Mark joined us a few minutes later, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we sat as a family. Fractured, hurting, but finally honest. The road ahead was unclear, but at least now we were all walking on the same path. I never imagined I'd find myself face to face with the woman who had given birth to my son. The woman who had lived in the shadows of my family, never far, yet never acknowledged. But I needed to meet her. Not out of curiosity, not out of jealousy, but because I had to see, with my own eyes, the person who had become a ghost in our lives. Her name, Dana, was now a presence in our home. Ethan spoke of her more freely, sometimes cautiously, sometimes with admiration. She hadn't tried to take him, but she was there, and it was time for me to know who she really was. I found her online. Not difficult. Her name was uncommon, and Ethan had left enough clues in his journal. A social media account led to a workplace led to an email, and an email led to a reply. She agreed to meet, a quiet cafe, halfway between our town and hers. I arrived early, palms sweating, stomach twisting in knots. I wore my simplest clothes, no makeup, no pretense. I didn't want to be impressive. I wanted to be honest. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately. The same auburn hair, soft features, eyes that echoed my son's. She smiled when she saw me, hesitant, kind, uncertain. "Hi," she said gently. "You must be her?" I nodded. "And you're Dana?" We sat in silence for a moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photograph. This was taken before everything. It was her, holding a newborn. "Ethan," she looked so young, so frightened. "I never wanted to give him up," she said quietly. "But I was 17. My parents wouldn't let me keep him." I begged. I cried. They said I'd ruin my life, so I signed the papers. I said nothing, just listened. I asked to be kept informed. I didn't want to vanish. But the adoption was closed. They said it would be better for him if we never met. So I lit a candle every year, every birthday. My chest ached. I thought of all the birthdays I had planned, all the little details I'd obsessed over, never knowing another woman out there had grieved on those very same days. "He found me?" she continued. "I never reached out to him directly. I swear, he sent me a message on his own." I nodded. "He told me." "I didn't mean to interfere," she said, eyes filling with tears. "You've been his mother. I don't want to take that from you." And somehow hearing that broke something in me. Not in anger, but in release. Because she got it. She wasn't the enemy. She wasn't trying to erase me. We talked for an hour, maybe more. We didn't try to become friends, but we became something else, co-authors of the same boy's life. Before she left, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "Thank you," she said, "for raising him, for loving him. I could never have done what you did." I didn't answer. I just nodded, holding back tears. Back home, I found Ethan in the backyard, headphones in, staring up at the sky. I sat beside him without a word. "I know you met her," he said, not looking at me. "I did. She told me you were kind." "She was kind too," he nodded. "It's weird, you know. I look at her and feel something familiar. But it's not home." I looked at him surprised. "You're home," he said quietly. "Even if I needed to find her, you're still the one who made me." I smiled, tears blurring my vision. There was no perfect resolution, no miracle that erased the pain. But in that moment, I knew we had turned a corner. And maybe that was enough. The dinner table had always been a place of ritual in our home. The clink of plates, the soft hum of conversation, laughter threading its way between bites of pasta and sips of juice. But that night, the table became a stage, one where truths were laid bare like open wounds. I set it carefully, choosing our usual spots, placing a vase of wilted daisies in the center. I didn't want fanfare. I wanted honesty. Ethan came downstairs first, quiet but expectant. Mark followed, shoulders heavy, guilt etched deep into the lines around his eyes. We sat, no one touched the food. "I think it's time we stop pretending," I began, my voice steady but thin. "All of us." Mark nodded, but it was Ethan who spoke first. "I know you're angry." "I'm hurt," I corrected gently. "Not just because you kept things from me, but because we were never allowed to build this family on truth. And now, we all pay the price." Mark cleared his throat. "It was my decision to keep it from you. From both of you. I thought I was protecting our family, but I realize now I was protecting myself." Ethan looked at him sharply. "So all those years when I asked questions and you shut me down." Mark looked down. "I was afraid. That you'd leave?" The words hung in the air. "I didn't leave," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "But I felt like I was never really whole." I looked at him then, at the boy I had raised. The one who used to build blanket forts in the living room, who would whisper dreams to me under the covers. He wasn't a child anymore. And maybe he never had been, not fully. Not with a piece of his story carved away and locked behind silence. "I met Dana," I said, and both Mark and Ethan froze. "She's kind and she loves you," I told Ethan. "And she was forced to make an impossible choice, one I hope you never have to understand." Ethan blinked, processing. "You don't hate her?" "No," I said. "I don't." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was reverent, like something sacred had passed through the room. "I want to spend more time with her," Ethan said quietly. "I need to. Not to replace anyone, but to know myself." I nodded. Mark looked at us both, his expression unreadable. "So what happens now?" I said, "What happens now is honesty. Finally, no more secrets." We ate, slowly. The food was cold, but the act of sharing it still mattered. No one cleaned their plates, but something else had been finished. An era of pretending, of withholding. And in its place, the fragile beginnings of a new truth. After dinner, Ethan lingered in the kitchen while Mark loaded the dishwasher. He turned to me and said, "I don't know where this leaves us." I touched his arm. "It leaves us exactly where we've always been. Trying our best. Loving each other. And now, telling the truth." He looked down, nodding, then he whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I never will." That night, I sat alone in the living room, the lights low, the television off. I listened to the sounds of the house settling. It didn't feel like a victory, but it felt like a beginning. And beginnings, even the painful ones, are better than silence. The day Ethan told me he was going to live with Dana was the second time I felt like I was losing a child. We were sitting on the front porch, the early autumn wind brushing against our skin, stirring dry leaves across the steps. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the yard, and everything felt suspended in time. One of those moments you know you'll remember forever, even as it unfolds. "I've made a decision," he said without looking at me. My heart skipped. I already knew what was coming. "I want to stay with her for a while," he said. "Not forever, just I need to know her, really know her." I swallowed hard. "For how long?" "I don't know. A few weeks. Maybe more." I nodded slowly, doing my best to stay composed. "Does this mean you're leaving us?" "No," he said quickly. "You're still my family. This isn't about choosing one over the other. It's just I need to fill in the blanks." I stared out at the street, the trees lining the sidewalks, the bike Ethan used to ride now collecting dust in the garage. "You understand this is going to change things. Even if you come back." "I know," he said softly. He left that weekend. We packed a small suitcase together, his favorite hoodie, a few books, his headphones. He stood in the doorway afterward, taking one last look at the house. "This place feels smaller than it used to," he said. "It's still your home?" I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He hugged me. Not quickly, not awkwardly, deeply. His arms around me like he was trying to hold on to everything that was still good between us. And then he was gone. The silence afterward was deafening. I woke each morning expecting to hear him clattering in the kitchen or stomping down the stairs. His room stayed exactly the same, but it felt hollow, like a set piece after the show had ended. Mark tried to comfort me, but he was grieving too. The tension between us had eased after the dinner table conversation, but we both carried the guilt in different ways. He, for the lies. Me for never seeing the truth sooner. I called Ethan every few days. Sometimes he answered, sometimes he didn't. When he did, the calls were brief, polite. He sounded content, comfortable. "She cooks differently," he told me once. "She listens a lot. But it's weird, like I belong and don't at the same time." I understood that more than he knew. One night, I stood outside his room, unable to sleep. I opened the door, stepped inside, and sat on the edge of his bed. I ran my hand along the blanket, stared at the posters on his wall. One corner was peeling off. He'd always meant to fix it. I whispered into the silence, "Please come back." It was a month before he returned to visit. He was taller, or maybe he just stood differently. More certain, more grounded. His eyes were softer, his voice more measured. He hugged me at the door. "Hi, Mom," he said. That word, Mom, felt like a lifeline. We didn't talk about the details of his stay. Not right away. Instead, we cooked together, watched a movie, folded laundry, the ordinary things, the things I had missed. Later, as we sat in the living room, he said, "She told me you were brave." I looked at him. "Brave? For letting me go?" I smiled through tears. "I didn't let you go, I waited for you." He nodded. "I know." And that was enough for now. I didn't ask him what he planned next, whether he'd go back, whether he'd stay. I didn't want to trap him in expectations. I just wanted him to know he still had a place in my life, in my heart. Always. The silence that followed Ethan's departure was nothing like I had expected. I had thought I'd be consumed by rage, or at least resentment. That I would feel betrayed, replaced, somehow erased. But instead, what lingered was something quieter, something far more devastating. Emptiness. The house, once filled with his footsteps, his late-night fridge raids, his laughter echoing down the stairs, had gone still. Even the floorboards seemed to creak less. His room remained untouched, as if frozen in time. I couldn't bring myself to change anything. The posters, the shoes by the closet, the unwashed hoodie draped across his chair, it all stayed exactly as he left it. At first, I would check my phone constantly. Every buzz, every vibration, I hoped it was him. A message, a photo, a silly meme like he used to send me before school. But most days, there was nothing. Mark tried to help in his way. He suggested we take a trip, go somewhere, just the two of us. I couldn't. The idea of stepping away from the house while Ethan was out there, alive, growing, evolving without me, felt unbearable. Some nights I sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the glow, the dark stars still stuck to the ceiling. We had put them there when he was 8 on a rainy Saturday afternoon. He had insisted on creating his own galaxy, and I let him choose where every star would go. Now I stared into that old sky, trying to find constellations in the silence. Mark grew quieter too. We had become careful around each other, like two people nursing invisible wounds, too afraid to reach out in case we touched a sore spot. We talked about logistics, bills, groceries, the weather. But the deeper conversation stopped. It was like we were roommates occupying a once-lived-in marriage. One evening, 3 weeks into Ethan's absence, I opened the closet and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were drawings Ethan made when he was a child. A house with a red roof, a stick figure family meme mark, and a tiny version of himself with impossibly large eyes. On the back, written in crayon, "My forever family." I broke down. The tears came fast, unrelenting, soaking into the paper as I clutched it to my chest. I had thought I was done crying, but grief has a way of hiding in quiet corners, waiting for the stillness to strike. After that night, I stopped waiting for his messages, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. I couldn't live in the pause between each word. I had to find a way to exist, even if that meant doing so without him for now. I started gardening again. I repainted the guest room. I even joined a book club, just to force myself to be around people who didn't see me as the woman whose son had left. Sometimes Mark would sit beside me in the evenings, reading or watching a show. We didn't talk much, but we were there. Two people slowly learning how to breathe again. Then one day a package arrived in the mail, no return address. My name written in careful, familiar handwriting. Inside was a photo. It was Ethan, standing with Dana in front of a lake, both smiling, the wind lifting his hair slightly. He looked happy, healthy. Attached was a small note: still thinking of you. Still your son. That night, I placed the photo beside the others on the mantle. Not out of surrender, but out of love. Because whatever role Dana now played in his life, I would always be the one who watched him fall asleep each night. Who bandaged his knees. Who knew how many stars were stuck to his ceiling. The silence hadn't ended, but it no longer sounded like goodbye. The letter came just as winter began to yield its grip on the town. When the last patches of snow melted into the grass and the air held a faint trace of spring. I hadn't expected anything. The mailbox had become a formality, filled with bills and catalogs. But that day, buried between an electric bill and a local flyer, was an envelope addressed in Ethan's handwriting. I froze on the front steps, staring at it like it might vanish if I blinked. I carried it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and let my fingers trace the edges. I didn't rush. I couldn't. The moment felt sacred, like something heavy was about to be lifted, or replaced. When I finally opened it, the paper shook in my hands. His handwriting was careful but uneven. There were scratched-out words, pauses, emotion pressed into every curve of ink. Mom, I didn't know how to say this out loud. Maybe that's why I'm writing it instead. Letters feel safer somehow, like I can speak without seeing your eyes and worrying what I've broken. I've been living with Dana for almost 3 months. She's kind, gentle, and she lets me ask the same questions over and over without getting tired. I see parts of myself in her. We share the same hands, the same laugh. But you and I, we share a history, a life, something she can't replace. At first, I thought finding her would fix everything. Like I could fill the missing space in me with her face, her stories. But it's not that simple. I feel pulled in 2 directions. One is biology, the other is love. I miss the way you hum when you cook. I miss movie nights, your bad popcorn seasoning experiments, your laugh when I try to make pancakes and burn them. I miss being able to sit in a room with you and not say anything and still feel home. I think I hurt you more than I meant to. And I'm sorry. Truly, I needed to find her. But I need you too, if you'll still have me. Love. Tears dripped onto the page before I could stop them. I clutched the letter to my chest and breathed in, deep and shaking. It wasn't just his words. It was the fact that he had written them at all. That he had reached back across the silence and tried to build a bridge, even if with trembling hands. That evening, I sat in his room for the first time in weeks without feeling the achy of his absence. I reread the letter. Then I began to write my own. Ethan, you've never stopped being mine. Not when you left. Not when you needed something I couldn't give you. I raised you not to need me forever. But I never stopped needing you. You're welcome here. Always. Whether for a day, a week, or forever. Come home when you're ready. The porch light will be on. Love always. Mom, I didn't send the letter that day. I placed it on his pillow instead for the moment he would return, because I believed, now more than ever, that he would. Weeks later, he did. He didn't announce it. He didn't call. He just appeared on the front porch one afternoon, backpack slung over one shoulder, his old hoodie hanging loose. I opened the door and we stood there, just looking at each other. I think I'm ready, he said. I didn't ask what for. I just pulled him into my arms. And this time, neither of us let go. Rebuilding didn't happen overnight. When Ethan came back, he didn't bring promises. He didn't swear that everything would be like before. And I didn't ask for that. What we had needed now wasn't a return to the past. It was a new foundation, poured slowly, carefully, one quiet moment at a time. He moved back into his room. At first, it felt like he was visiting. He kept his backpack near the door, like he wasn't sure how long he'd stay. I didn't ask. I made dinner, folded his laundry, left notes by his nightstand. I was there, present but not pressing. One night about a week after his return, he joined me on the back porch. It was late, the stars overhead casting soft silver light across the yard. We hadn't spoken much that day, both of us unsure of how to move in this new version of our home. I saw your letter, he said finally. I hoped you would. He looked down at his hands. I was scared to come back, scared you wouldn't want me. I turned to him, gently. There was never a time I didn't want you, Ethan. Not one second. He nodded, eyes shining. I know that now. From then on, our conversations grew less tentative. He talked about Dana sometimes, not as a wedge but as a part of his life. A part that could coexist alongside me, not replace me. He told me she still called, still checked in, but he also told me that he missed the way I tucked in the ends of his blanket when he napped on the couch. The way I knew which brand of cereal he liked without asking. We began to laugh again. Small things at first, a clumsy joke, a memory that caught us both by surprise. Then, slowly, the laughter stayed longer. It didn't erase the pain, but it made space for it. That was the difference. Mark was more cautious. His guilt still lingered in his voice, in his eyes. He apologized, more than once, but the healing between him and Ethan moved differently. They were two men learning how to speak a new language with each other. Sometimes it came easily, sometimes not. I gave them space. One evening, I found the two of them in the garage, tinkering with Ethan's old bike. They didn't talk much, but their silence had shifted. It was no longer strained, it was familiar. 3 months after Ethan returned, we had dinner together, real dinner, not just food eaten under the same roof. We talked, we passed dishes, we shared stories. And for the first time since all of this began, I looked across the table and felt something like peace. That night, Ethan knocked on our bedroom door. I'm thinking about applying to colleges, he said. Some nearby, some farther away, but I want to stay close for now. Mark nodded. Whatever you decide, we'll support you. Ethan turned to me. I want you to help me with my essay. I smiled. Of course. Later, I read the draft. It began, family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up, who stays, who fights for you when you're too tired to fight for yourself. I cried, not because it made everything okay, but because it showed me we were getting there. A year passed, Ethan still saw Dana. She came for birthdays, holidays. We shared space, gently, respectfully. I never felt replaced. And maybe that's because Ethan never let me. He still calls me mom. He always had, but now, when he says it, it's weighted with choice, not obligation. That's what healing looks like, not perfect, but real, and real is enough. These are stories that show the consequences and limits of family relationships, especially between parents and children. They reveal how silence, even when well-meaning, can become a wound, how truth once uncovered can fracture, but also mend. They show that love is not measured by biology but by presence, by patience, by the willingness to rebuild after everything falls apart. If you've ever experienced something like this, a betrayal, a distance, a reunion, I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below. Let's talk about what family really means. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more.